Serious, Redditors who came from a country with heavy censorship, what was the most surprising thing to find out after you left? I'm from Thailand. With our less majorist law here, almost every information about the royal family that doesn't praise them get filtered out. Kids today haven't heard of King and I. Majority of the country isn't aware of many scandals revolving around the current king. Malaysian here. As a person who generally spends a lot of time and money, food and Tesco Lotus, in Hatai, we have nothing but respect for your old king. King Bhumibol, Song Fra Jarian. However, your new king, not so much. I grew up in South Korea watching Pokemon and the female villain's waist was always black, like she was wearing a top under the shorter top. Realized later on that they covered her belly with black color so that she wouldn't show her belly button. Also in One Piece they change all of Sanji's cigarettes into a lollipop and there's no blood every time they fight. Dude, you watched the 4Kids dub, the most hideous a dub can ever get, and it's American. Born and raised in Saudi Arabia, so major censorship by not just the government, but society as well. I moved to Canada a few years ago so I experienced massive changes on how I viewed the world around me. It started with what you usually expect, such women's clothing, music everywhere, bars, parties, western stuffs. But the most shocking thing I realized was how the weather affected my mood every day. Growing up in a hot desert climate was always tiring to go outside for long periods of time. I remember all those times I was sweaty for just going outside to the local shop. People over here spend a majority of the days indoors with the air conditioner always on. I got used to it, but it always was something you had to deal with and it ruined my mood almost every day. When I moved to Canada, I was so relieved that it was so cold and refreshing it is to stand out and not sweat at all. Sure there's rain, but it's better than facing the blazing hot sun any day. I could actually look up at the sky and not have to squint my eyes to look at the blue sky. In SAR, I noticed the sky was much paler in comparison to CA. My experience in a much more easier climate helped me feel more relaxed and less stressful all the time. I'm British. I really enjoy how this turned into a weather comparison. China, you don't have to leave the country to find some surprising things since we have internet and VPN. Nowadays, learned about Tiananmen Square massacre when I was 12, learned about Tibet Free when I was 18, learned about how Taiwan people want independence when I was 20 or so, learned about Western media also has biased opinions against different countries when I was 22 maybe. I'm Chinese Canadian who lived in China, currently here right now. Firstly, it's pretty frustrating to see people assume the degree and effect of censorship. Sometimes it's not as bad as it could be, when you are aware that the media has bias and will report from a certain perspective. Of course, many news reports are like this even in Canada and the US. But it is much more obvious in China. I'm talking about CCTV, newspapers, and other conventional news media. They will always take a nationalistic side. However, what I believe is the worst censorship is the ones on search engines and social media. The government actually does not take a direct approach and censor information. Rather, the search engine companies themselves do the censorship in fear of government interference. Top search engines such as Baidu, Sogao, etc., and social media like WeChat will block certain links themselves. WeChat will sometimes refuse to take you to a certain website, etc. There was a rumor a few years back that if you have a certain number of followers on VIP Weibo, Chinese Twitter, you would be put under some list where your posts and accounts would be monitored and potentially deleted erased. Not sure how much truth is in that. Other than that, some websites are blocked in China, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, Instagram, Pornhub, and some more. For Chinese people it's not really a big deal as we have our own versions of these in Chinese. But if you really need or want access then just buy a VPN. VPNs to bypass the Great Firewall are available on Taobao online shopping platform owned by Alibaba. Seriously, this stuff is technically illegal but everyone knows its existence, is super easy to purchase, and really cheap. From what I've noticed, censorship's perhaps biggest noticeable impact in daily life is that people are much more tight-lipped about controversial events, including past ones. This is just my experience and what I've noticed personally. Can't speak for anyone else. Don't hesitate to correct me. I am born and still currently live in Singapore, so did not really leave per se. However, when the internet became far more popular and in a way, North American centric, many of my views began to change. When I was a child up till about 14, drugs were the absolute taboo in society. It was like, oh god, if you so much see that crap, you will die. It was not until later did I realize the difference between the god-awful ones like H and the somewhat okay ones like marijuana. That being said, I wouldn't touch drugs with a 10-foot pole in Singapore or now. Death penalty. That was very much the same with premarital sex, where schools advocated abstinence until children were older and finally discovered things by themselves. I lived in Dubai, and when I first came to the US to start college, I noticed a group of people surrounding these two old guys holding signs who seemed to be preaching. Not sure which sect of Christianity, but the conversation switched to being about politics. The students were simply yelling at each other and at those old guys, and some of them straight up cursing Obama, Christianity, and amongst other things. I really didn't know what the heck they were yelling about except hearing those obvious insult phrases. But what really surprised me the most and what made me realize that I am totally in America was that about 15 feet away were two policemen just standing there watching, not doing anything at all but kinda laughing at the whole ordeal. I think that's when I realized what true freedom of speech really means. When you can curse your own president in a public university as loud as you can while have officers just let you do it. Officers just let you do it. The officers don't let us do that. The Constitution lets us do that. Grew up in Malaysia and never knew anything about the Holocaust until the advent of good internet access in the late 2000s. World War II is mentioned in our history textbooks, but not the bit where 6 million Jews were exterminated. We have a tendency to censor anything pro-Jewish. Schindler's List and The Prince of Egypt were not allowed to be played in movie theaters here. Holy frick. I knew that Holocaust denial was rather common in some countries, but to never even have heard of it. Venezuela. I was surprised how much information there was to be had about the situation in the country. Local media is government owned and report nothing that matters. Was very difficult to find out where the protests would be and when, which caused me to run into National Guard repression a few times. Gov was and still is fighting a very intense information war to disorient and demotivate the opposition as much as possible. Lots of sites blocked and only accessible via proxies, but the internet quality is crap and it was very slow to use the proxies. Twitter was our main source, but again, very unreliable and full of fake crap and Maduro bots. Like a couple of others here, I grew up in Apartheid South Africa, and it took years for me to realize how much the government of the time had concealed what was happening to the non-white people of the country. Going to places like the Apartheid Museum is sobering. Me too. Recently I happened upon some Wikipedia and other sites that touched on Walter Basson and some of that stuff. Truly depressing, the crap that went on. I left Oman, where I grew up, for college in the US. For the better part of the past 5 years, traditional and social media are censored when it comes to the leadership of the country. You can be thrown in jail if you posted anything that is deemed to be a threat to the order of the country. That includes invoking riots and political movements opposing the current leadership. However, it has to be made clear that current Sultan, Qaboos, who ruled the country since 1970, is loved by the vast majority of the public. That's why many people tend to turn a blind eye to such censorship. We also have heavy non-political censorship. All sex scenes and nudity in movies and TV shows are either blurred using a beam of light or CG shadows or outright deleted. That's also applicable in cartoons and anime, in addition to hiding partially visible boobs, waist, and female thighs via multiple techniques. All P websites are blocked, except the ones that are not. Books regarding the Omani civil war that took place just before the current sultan took over are also hard to come by, as most of them don't get authorized to be published. The First Amendment, in general, was a pretty foreign idea in the sense that you can make fun of political and religious figures like the Potters and Jesus without getting into deep crap. I'm still not a big fan of how Muslims are portrayed, but I made peace with the fact that everyone has an agenda they wanna serve. In both countries, thanks to the media, we view people from different cultures as the others and forget that we're just humans and most of us just want to lead a simple life. I also found it interesting how media in both countries view a conflict very differently. I was the last intake to do 2 years of national service in South Africa. Shortly after I went in, to get it over and done with, they announced it was going to be abolished with the guys coming in mid-year doing 18 months. And NBSP. My parents weren't connected internationally through family or part of university level intellectual society, so we had absolutely no idea national service was going to end. And NBSP. If I had gone overseas for a couple of years or even just been AWOL for a few years, I wouldn't have had to do it. And NBSP. It was almost a benign, very under the radar state controlled media, so I am very much pro free speech and free media now. My Romanian friend told me that everything they said about communism was false, and everything they said about capitalism was true. That's actually super accurate and funny. Communism isn't all that great and neither is capitalism. From China, and still in China. I grew up in the US since I was 4 and then moved back to China at the age of 6. This was before the internet was actually a thing. So every once in a while I move back to the States. I feel pretty surprised on how things are developing. I should probably talk about censorship in China first, I suppose. Yes, it's totally there. Google has been down since 2015. YouTube in 2007. I think that was the year. Neopets was also down in 2006, I believe. As much as it sounds surprising, most people here don't give a F. Why, you might ask? Because they knew how to live without these things. Who needs Google when you have a search engine that works well enough? Who needs YouTube when you already have Tudo and other video sites? Who would ever need something like Dropbox when thumb drives work perfectly? When they can't find what they want, most people just believe they aren't a computer person. It's not Beatty's fault. I've screamed at many people over the years for not learning to use Google even if they are in the US. Others believe a 1.5 minute ad before a video is totally fine because everybody does so. But so when you ask people to use something new, they just don't want to change. Are there people in China who actually mind about the censorship? Yes, one here. But after years of screaming censorship is bad into other people's ears, nobody listens. A lot of us are just tired. VPNs don't actually work against the GFW. Well, technically they work 80% of the time. The CCP can probe and actively block most VPN protocols, but they usually don't do it often because it disrupts businesses, which is bad for the economy. People who know about the GFW would usually use something more discreet. For example, Shadowsocks doesn't have a header that can be recognized, and it can be encrypted in 256 AES. I would also recommend it even if you are in the States and looking for a hidden proxy. One thing this told me is that technology should never be trusted. What may work today might not work when you need it again. Never be too dependent on anything. VPN's proxies may fail. Websites might be blocked. Storing your stuff on someone else's server isn't a good idea. So how does this answer the original question? I would say that I'm surprised that people are so dependent on Google, Microsoft and more. What would happen if you store everything on Google Drive and it fails tomorrow? Are you sure that Microsoft wouldn't sell your data to someone else? People are just too trusting. Shit could happen tomorrow, and if it does, you are screwed. I say this would apply no matter where you are. And I still feel surprised that most people still put all their eggs in one basket. TLDR. The general population in China wouldn't find anything surprising, because they don't care. Some people might find it dangerous that people in the States can trust and depend on corporations so easily. A lot of movies were longer than I thought, and the scenes weren't as kinky as I expected. Disappointed. I learned that very poor people with little to no education are very aware that they are being heavily exploited by international forces. It was great to get back though. I really missed college football. So we meet again, friend. Growing up in Norway, a lot of movie violence would be censored. Imagine an action movie where, in the final fight scene, it goes straight from the hero and villain insulting each other to the villain being unconscious dead. That's TV, of course. The full version would be available on VHS with an 18-year age restriction. Then I moved abroad and learned that other countries are a lot less open about sex. For example, in English, W is an insult. That wouldn't work in Norway. It would be like trying to insult someone by accusing them of pooping in the toilet. South Africa. Just how much the world loved Mandela. To me, Mandela was a terrorist. His arrest sheet details the possession of landmines and other weapons. His party planted landmines and also bombed shopping malls, railway stations and post offices. Especially relevant since I was 2 kilometers when our local post office was bombed and my dad was in the post office several hours earlier in the day. Then he wins the Nobel Peace Prize. Mandela was certainly a terrorist, but to be fair, the apartheid state was both rogue and also a terrorist state. My mother grew up in communist Poland, and she found out in her 20s that Russia attacked Poland in World War II. Up until then, schools and textbooks were not allowed to say anything bad about Russia. I'm from China. Haven't left. Don't plan to either. After I got on the real internet, I learned about the student protest in Tiananmen Square and the Tibetan independence movement. Not sure if it counts, but anyway, I'm 16. I was born in France but then moved to Tunisia when I was 2, where I lived until 2012. I lived in Tunis and now reside in NYC. First, pictures of the president. I mean, yes, you do have pictures of the president here and there, but there are no flags of Trump every corner. In Tunisia, every office or something has the picture of the president with the Tunisian flag behind. Also, military being everywhere. Seriously thought tanks and the army with AK-47 and barbed wire everywhere in the main area was normal. Related to censorship, but not directly addressing the question. Didn't live there, but when I went on holiday to Bali, MTV Indonesia blurred out the backsides of Little Mix in their touch video clip, and the boob area of Zara Larsson So Good, even though those areas already had clothes, albeit fairly skimpy ones. Not a big censorship thing, but interesting anyway. I got to USA and people here are all for censoring the left and right, and I'm like, you don't know what censorship is like. How little people understand about it, and oddly enough how many people seem to want it. Try saying anything positive about Armenia and Azerbaijan and then we'll see if you think a privately owned company not including some South Park level edgy joke is censorship. Egyptian here, sad thing is huge chance if you hated the police or insulted them online you had a chance to get jailed, so you always either praise them or shush love you police please don't jail. 3. I can't say I come from a place with heavy censorship, but once I arrived in the UK I found it really strange that a business is allowed to not only mention a competitor, but also claim that they are better than them. Imagine something like going to Burger King and seeing a label like "We are better than McDonald's because X and Y." Now imagine this with banks and network providers. Was strange at first. That Ho Chi Minh is not the brightest leader in the history, giving birth to my whole nation. Seriously, and I can live happily, being a good person without looking up to him in everything we do. He is a big history figure, yes, but a son, no. The one thing I realize is that the people who have freedom of speech are undeserving freaking rats, while people who have things with actual worth and merit to say often do not have the right to free speech. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.